Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music. So, symmetry. What do you think of when you think of symmetry? I think of, visual things like this. There's melodic symmetry. We'll talk about it. And harmonic symmetry. We'll talk about it. Rhythmic symmetry. Wait, I think rhythmic symmetry might be too much for today. Melodic and harmonic symmetry. Here we go. The octave is divided in 12 equal bits. That's suggestive. Look at the keyboard. So there's middle C, and the truth is, it's not on the keyboard really a very sort of symmetrical location. You know, if I go up a half step, it's a black key, but if I go down a half step, it's a white key. So what if I begin on this D? If I go up a half step and down a half step, they're both black keys, and etc. As I go outwards, it makes a pretty picture on the screen. And also, isn't that awesome looking? Is mechanically symmetrical. Look at it on this. The first thing we want to talk about when we divide the octave, and I'm going to go back to this octave C, is dividing the octave exactly in half. That is to say, 6 half steps up, 6 half steps up. That divides the octave in 2 equal bits, and you probably noticed it gives me a tritone. The tritone is sort of the first fundamental symmetrical division of the octave, and it's no accident that it's at the heart of the dominant chord. The tritone, C and F sharp, is at the heart of the dominant chord D7. And that tritone is dissonant and really wants to resolve. D7 is the 5 of G. One more division of the octave. So that was 2. Let's divide it into 3. It's funny that these symmetrical divisions of the octave sound a little dissonant. 4 half steps, 4 half steps, 4 half steps. We get what's called an augmented chord. Augmented chords are 2 major thirds stacked one on top of the other. 4 equal divisions of the octave. 3 half steps, 3 half steps, 3 half steps, 3 half steps. We get what's called a diminished chord. Well, the augmented and diminished chords are both symmetrical chords whose sonority is dissonant. Almost all of the chords that we use routinely in pop and rock are a combination of those 2 intervals. Major third, minor third on top. Interesting, right? That's a typical major chord. By the same token, a minor third on the bottom and then a major third on top gives me the minor triad. It's interesting to me that what sort of feels mathematically reasonable, and since I'm recording this on Pi Day today, 3/14, I'm thinking about math, is not harmonically or sort of like emotionally, musically reasonable. That said, there are some really excellent uses for these symmetrical chords. For instance, if we're at an A minor chord and I drop the bottom note, I get an augmented chord, and that bass line continues down, and I wind up with a sort of a D dominant sound. It's got that tritone in it. There are lots of symmetries baked into things. The diminished chord also functions as maybe the best passing chord of all time. Like here I have a C chord and I want to go up to D minor. This diminished chord here, C sharp diminished, moves beautifully to D minor. Diminished chords have 2 tritones in them. Here's that D minor chord again. Here's the diminished chord that leads to it. I can add another note to make it a fully diminished 7th. The tritone C sharp G resolved to the D minor. But if I go and add that, I now have a fully diminished chord, and I've got 2 tritones, the original one And also this one here, that's like a tritone from a C7 or an F sharp 7. F sharp 7 is the 5 of B. I can go C, fully diminished, B minor. Wow, great crazy modulation, works beautifully. Diminished chords are great for modulating. The Scriabin chord, the Scriabin mystery chord, is essentially a augmented chord. Here's an F augmented chord with a dominant seventh, a flat seventh on the top. And it kind of wants to go, I don't know, somewhere. Wasn't that beautiful? Did you hear F7 going to A minor? Okay, tricks with symmetrical melody. Well, symmetrical melodies are great for creating dissonant counterpoint and surprising counterpoint, which still sort of conceptually hangs together. I'll show you what I mean. Here's a C major scale. And it has sort of a half step, whole step identity. Whole step up, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and then half step to get back to the C. What if I use that same formula to go down? Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. If you look at the notes that I just played, down below, you can see there's 4 flats in there. And in fact, what that is an A-flat major scale from C to C. Wacky, cool, interesting, and definitely dissonant. Visually on the screen, it is clearly symmetrical. Do your ears hear what I hear? It's dissonant. There's some really strong moments that are dissonant, right? Most of them are, and yet there's a logic to it which is also perceivable. The power of symmetrical counterpoint is a kind of a dissonant logic. Here's my melody. Here's my dissonant counterpoint. It's cool looking. It looks like a Delta Flyer. Symmetrical melodies can use symmetrical scales as well. That was just a normal major scale, and they had symmetrical counterpoint to it. But it's worth talking about scales and melodies that are derived from symmetrical scales. Here's the most symmetrical scale there is. It's just the chromatic scale. All 12 notes. We've taken the octave and we've divided it just beautifully into all 12 bits. But by the same token, we could also go in whole steps. I love the whole step scale. And of course, there's only 2 of them. But there are other combinations of things like that. For instance, what's called the octatonic or diminished scale is really, really useful for us. Did you see what I did? I went whole step, half step, whole step, half step, now whole step, half step, whole step, half step. 8 notes in the scale. Of course, it doesn't have to go whole step half. It could go half whole. And actually, that's a great scale for dominant chords. It's got like all the notes of the dominant chord built in. Jazz musicians use it all the time. Right. Well, there are probably other, and you can think of them, symmetrical scales. One that I showed quite recently, it's kind of a hybridization of the idea of symmetry, is the double harmonic minor. And if you look at it, I'll switch over to, it actually looks symmetrical, doesn't it? I mean, there it is. It's like this beautiful sort of 70s racing stripe. Symmetry's played an enormous role in art and music and beauty, kind of always, hasn't it? The human body is bilaterally symmetrical. The idea of a perfectly symmetrical face is one of the ideals of beauty. And yet, in scales and chords, symmetry can sound a little dissonant, but it's dissonance we can use. We can use the ear's ability to perceive that dissonance as logical in a almost like mathematical way, and yet dissonant to create excitement and energy and propulsion in our own music. You wouldn't want to build an entire piece around just the idea of symmetries. Well, you might want to, but it's a really useful tool for us. Well, I hope this has been useful. Like and subscribe, ding the bell, you know, the tricks, the things that we do here on YouTube. You'll be notified when I do my videos, and I'll see you next time.